So
I
shifting
do.
to, as much as you love it, what is sort of the hardest part, right? What is the toughest part about teaching abroad in Japan and in Asia in general?
hmm Um, Definitely the language barrier. That's
Mm,
a huge, huge thing. Obviously, I'm teaching English, so there's English in the classroom, but there are times that the kids don't understand what I'm saying.
right.
Um, no matter how simple I try to break things down, some things they
Mm,
just won't get unless it's spoken to them, it's explained to them in their language. Um, and being that, in this like immersion type of class, you can't really speak Japanese,
right.
which I mean, I kind of do sometimes, just a little
I've
bit.
seen the videos.
Um,
Yes. You start, and then
um,
they're like, Mr. Patrick, no Japanese.
right, they're quick to get on you about that. But it's still it's hard to really explain something, some concepts to them, and so um, that can be a bit difficult. I wouldn't say it's a huge difficulty, but it's one thing.
Yeah.
But in terms of living here, like just in general, going out, going grocery shopping, going to this place, that place, you're gonna run into situations where you can't really express what you want. You can't ask what you're trying to
Mm,
ask
mhm,
for,
mm,
and you can't, you can't get your point across, and you can't understand what people are trying to say to you when
mm,
they're
mhm.
answering your attempt at a question.
Right, right.
um, and so Google Translate comes in handy,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, and it's if you have Japanese friends who are around to help you, that's also obviously a
Right.
very big help. But sometimes you don't have Japanese friends around to help you.
Yeah.
In fact, often for me, when I first moved to Tokyo, the first few months, I didn't know anybody here. I knew a few
Mhm,
people who had moved
mhm.
here from Sendai, but I moved right when the Corona situation got pretty bad in Tokyo. Um, which I mean, bad for Tokyo is like amazing for the U.S.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's y'all struggling over there.
Okay, well,
No offense, no shade.
fine, fine. Sits in my
um,
yeah.
but because of that, yeah, I wasn't able to like really go out and like try to make friends or even see the friends who had moved here before me.
Right.
So it was pretty lonely, and so I didn't have people to kind of help when I
Yeah.
did need help. Besides my company, they helped with a lot of things, but
Right.
yeah, there's difficulties with the language barrier for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, but that comes, I mean, that gets a bit easier with time. Obviously, you study the language as much as you can. Um, and you find ways in the classroom, you find ways to really help the students understand stuff, whether it be trying to show them a picture on your phone,
Right.
which in my case leads to kids being like, "Oh, show you,"
Right.
because I'm used to saying, "Okay, I'm going to show you the picture on my phone," and it's just an endless cycle.
For those that don't know, shoyu is Japanese for soy sauce, so that also is kind of like it's like a pun kind of thing that they
Yeah,
say.
they love it. They
Yeah.
love that fun.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, with technology being what it is, that's super helpful. And so there are ways you can get around. And in Japan, like there are a lot of English signs. There are things to help you. There's like announcements in Japanese, and then there'll be a second one in English explaining the same thing, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
I would say in terms of also living in Japan, like it's difficult. It's very difficult to make like good Japanese friends. What I
Yeah.
mean by that, like not like you can make bad Japanese friends, but not good ones. Like I just mean like people you're close to, like really close Japanese
Mhm.
friends, because Japanese people tend to be a bit more not standoffish, but like they're more reserved and they don't open up
Yep.
as easily
Yep.
as like an American would. We meet someone and we tell them our first name like immediately, but in in Japan, like it I don't know if this is actually true or not. I've heard from a Japanese person that like when you're meeting someone, when Japanese people meet each other, they don't share their names
Yeah.
initially. Like they talk for a bit and then they eventually get to the point where they share their names, as opposed to Americans,
Right.
where that's the first thing you say. And so that I've been able to like meet Japanese people, and we exchange contact information, and we'll talk a bit maybe through texting, and then a couple days go by and I never hear from them again.
Yeah.
So I have to message them again, and it just kind of like fizzles out. The relationship kind of fizzles out. Sorry. And so I have made a few friends who are more westernized, and they're used to that like flow of communication that we have in the US that's more just like natural for us. And so I've been able to maintain those relationships a bit better. But with people who maybe haven't experienced that, it is a bit difficult to make friends with them. And so that also can lead to some loneliness if you're in a new place and you don't know anybody.
Yeah.
My school in Sendai, I had my sister there for that little bit of time that she was there before moving back.
Right.
But also my school had a very large group of American English teachers, and so we would always do things together, which was both a pro and a con. It was it was good because we had a community there, but also a con because it was an English bubble, and so it was difficult to learn Japanese during those first 5 years in Sendai. I did not improve in my Japanese skills very much.
Right.
The first 2 years, I took a class, like a very basic Japanese class, and kind of got some of the foundations down. And then from that point on, I became busier with work. That was another big thing. I got really busy with my job and got more responsibilities. But also, there's just like a huge English bubble, and so my Japanese kind of just plateaued.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons I wanted to move to a new school here in Tokyo. And so I'm able to like take classes now, and I enjoy learning the language.
Yeah.
But it can be difficult if you don't have that community of people to do things with, whether they're Japanese or American or wherever, yeah. And I would say in terms of like teaching, it's difficult when your culture just doesn't always, I mean, it's obviously different. My culture is different than Japanese culture. So there are things that are normal for the kids to do, and like different expressions they have, different sounds they make, different gestures that I'm just like, what does this mean? What is this?
Right.
And then I do something and the kids are like, what is that? I wouldn't say it's like super difficult, but it's something you get used to over time, but it is something to get used to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more so just funny. I think it makes me laugh when you have those moments.
Yeah, the different like cultural nuances that happen, or like different cultural things. You're like, oh, that's really interesting that's how they do that, right? Or like, one of my favorite was like when you want to call somebody over, you do like this, right? You like beckon them over like a cat, right? But in Japan, you'd be like, hey, like come on, like what are you doing, like whatever, and like that stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's always interesting to learn those different things and see how they use them. I think everything you said is definitely things that anyone will experience when they go teach abroad, right? And especially in Japan, there's just sort of this concept of us versus them, tatemae versus honne, right? And a lot of times, a lot of the tatemae, which is what's known as sort of your forward-facing face, if you will, for right now, we'll say that. And then honne is sort of your inward, real feelings, right?
Right.
Takes a lot for you to get to a Japanese person's honne, right?
Yeah.
It really does take time. Time is really the biggest thing, right? I was in Japan for 2 years, and then when I told them I was leaving, it was like, oh, we got to be friends. We got to do all this stuff, and I'm like, like I wish we could. But it took about 2 years for them to feel comfortable enough to go out to do things and stuff like that. So I think definitely time is the biggest part with that. But it can feel like it takes forever to get to
that point, right? I forgot to mention too, being Black in Japan is not a difficulty, but it leads to a whole lot of stares. People be staring all the time, like they never stop. The stares never stop. Not one of the most common things, but sometimes people will ask me on Instagram or TikTok, like, how do you deal with all the staring? And I'm like, honestly, I wish I could say you just get used to it. Cause some people do just get used to it, but like me being a really self-conscious person, I do kind of get used to it, but there are moments when it like, I don't know, that I guess that awareness of the fact that people are staring kind of spikes up, and I'm like, oh no, everyone's staring at me because
Yeah.
I don't know, they think I'm dirty, or my
Right.
hair's something's sticking up in some place, or something's caught in my hair, or I don't know what. And so I get kind of self conscious in those moments when it kind of spikes.
And if I remember,
But
you're fairly tall, correct?
yeah, I'm 6'2".
So that,
Yeah, so
yeah, so that
I stand
also,
over almost all of them.
yeah, that's also gonna bring some stares.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I just have to constantly remind myself, okay, they're not staring at you because they dislike you or because they think you're crazy looking or something.
Mm.
They're staring because they're surprised, which is generally what the reason is.
Yeah.
There are some people
Yes.
who maybe are racist or just would not they don't like foreigners being in the country. Those kind of usually the older generation is kind of more like that. But no one's told me to my face, get out of the country. I've had some foreign friends who have said that's happened to them. It's
Mm.
never happened to me before, but so while I'm sure there are some people who feel that way when they see me, and that might be why they stare, I'm very sure like 95% of the people who are staring are just surprised
Yeah.
/ interested.
Yeah.
But it can get to you. So that is
Yeah.
one, like, I guess, difficulty too.
One of the things that used to get to me was going to the grocery store. I was like paralyzed. It took me a lot
Oh,
to like build up the courage to like go to the grocery because I lived in a smaller town in the countryside. So,
okay.
like the chance
Smaller
of
one.
just running into your students or the teachers, or like I had heard stories about like if you crossed the street the wrong way and the principal saw it, they would tell you the next day and stuff like that, right?
No.
Yeah.
Oh no,
So in the
wow.
countryside, you had to be a little bit more careful about how you moved, but it definitely could get
Mm.
to a sort of paralyzing thing. So I definitely understand that, and yeah, it takes a little getting used to. But then sometimes just like stare back at them, just be like, "Can I help?"
Yep, which is definitely what I do.
Yep. Like, can I help you? Okay.
Mhm.
Um, I think that sort of segues into sort of my next question, and sort of a little bit beyond the TikToks, right? Going a little bit deeper, and there was a Metropolis article that you did, Tokyo
Mm.
Metropolis
Yeah.
magazine, right, where you talked about your sort of using your platform, the way you use it, right, and
Mhm.
you're using it to change narratives, right? You're using it to change the schemas that Japanese
Mm.
people have in their head about Black Americans or about Americans in general, right? When did
Mhm.
you know or sort of decide that you were going to use your platform that way? Was it sort of like from the beginning you were like, all right, I'm going to use humor to translate these situations? Or was it like it naturally started to come about? And, I know, of course, a
Mm.
lot of things happened in June with the death of George Floyd and stuff like that. And that probably brought a lot of attention to things. So talk to us a little bit about
Mhm.
how you decided to use your platform that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess when I started TikTok back in October of 2019, it was kind of just like a casual startup. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, you should do TikTok," because I like dancing, and I had
Mm-hmm.
created a bunch of little dances for my school in Sendai to
Nice.
do for the kids to learn. She's like, "You should dance on TikTok. You love dancing. You could actually like do
Yeah.
well on TikTok." And I was like, maybe. And so I started one, and I initially was just doing like dances. It wasn't anything like, I never intended to be speaking about these kinds of issues or like bringing
Mhm,
light to these issues,
mhm, mhm.
or these like conversations.
Yeah.
Um, but then as time went on, and I made a few skits about my skin color. There was one really early on, like maybe when I make that, it was probably January
Okay.
of this year. So I'd only had TikTok for a few months at that point. And it was like a little skit about my students trying to figure out why I'm brown. So they're like suggesting these different reasons why I'm brown. And then the American kid or the bilingual kid like gets it right. And it's supposed to be kind of funny. And that one did really well. That was one of the most viral TikToks that I had at that point. Um, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, I've had this experience too," or like, "That's so." A lot of Black Americans were like, "They really think that they actually don't know why." Like, that's so crazy. And
Mhm.
so it just showed me a lot of people, um, a lot of Americans are very curious about how Japan works and what the people think. And then there were some comments of not many, but a few comments from like Japanese people being like, "Oh, I had a black teacher when I was a kid too, and I had these same questions in class with him or her or whatever." I would say so. That was like kind of like when I guess started to not like change gears and make my content more about that, but that was when I first sort of realized that there are people who are really curious about this stuff who from both sides, like Japanese people who expressed interest in why exactly we're brown, and Americans who are curious as to why Japanese people don't know why I'm brown. And then it was May or June that I started to make more skits about, like, I made one about my hair and how students think my hair is a wig. And I'm like, it's not a wig. I promise you, it's not a wig. And people loved it. People thought it was really funny because it was just so shocking to them that the students wouldn't understand that. And then I made a video in June about the George Floyd murder. And I remember I was kind of hesitant to make it because most of my audience is America. Like the majority of my followers are from the US. And I'd seen so many TikToks made by other Black TikTokers about the situation. And I felt the same as them. And I just kind of was like, I don't really know if there's a point in me making a video because I would just say the same thing that everyone else is saying. So I don't really need to speak up about this because I think almost all Black Americans feel the same, right? But then a few people were like, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Patrick. Can you please make a video about it? And I was like, I guess that's a good point. Like, people would like to hear my thoughts. I have a decent amount of followers. Like, even if I feel the same as everybody else, it's important to lend my voice to this conversation. And so I made one saying like, this was horrible. And I what did I say? I don't remember exactly what I said, but basically I was condemning what happened and I was calling for change in America, I think. And there were a few Japanese people who commented on it, who were like, "This is interesting. Like, what is this situation about?" And not too long after that, there was that I don't know if you know about the NHK little.
Of course, Baye is a good friend of mine. So yeah, I know about that. I saw about that and stuff like that. But.
Yeah, it was awful. It was like for those watching, a little short animation about why Black Americans were protesting. And what was it? They said the reason was because of the money or the disparity between like white people and Black people and Corona, was it, or something like that? I don't remember.
They also like drew these terrible
the caricatures
of people, and it was just the Black people were like super bulky and like rough and
like looking like
it was awful. I don't know
terrible.
Who approved that or thought that in any way that would be a good idea, but I remember seeing Baye post about it and I was just like, oh no. Like, y'all are going down.
Yeah, people were not, I don't know about Japanese people, but a lot of foreign people in Japan were upset about it. And I was annoyed because that was the message being put out to the Japanese people who are very ignorant about this type of stuff, a lot of them. But I think they made some sort of apology later. They took it down and made like an apology. Yeah.
It's still, in this day and age, for something like that to get approved in a country like Japan was just like, it was surprising and it wasn't. And that's a whole conversation, right? But like, the media in Japan and where they choose to play ignorant and where they choose to be very informed, right? So like what's happening right now with how they're blaming foreigners for the rise in Corona cases. And it's like, I'm sorry, you all had GoTo Travel and GoTo Eat and y'all were encouraged.
Exactly.
And you're not letting any foreigners in. So how is it their fault?
Exactly.
Ooh, sorry.
Yep.
I will go on a rant, but you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. Yep. Ooh, these conversations happen at work all the time. That's all we talk about these days. Yeah.